This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for December 4th through the 10th. On this week's show, we find out what happens when bad organizing, a biker gang, and beer mix together, and we lose music legends under completely different circumstances. When it comes to running music festivals, organization is key. Actually, it's essential. Just ask the tech guys who tried to do the Fire Festival on a barren island with no infrastructure just how important organizing a music festival months in advance really is. Of course, that whole thing turned out to be an alleged scam, so its lack of organization exposed those supposed fault lines, I guess. But I digress. Back in 1969, for instance, Woodstock took 400,000 people and treated them to a peaceful celebration of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or at least that's the way the myth gets told. What was missed was that the event, aside from people crashing what wasn't actually a free event, was organized well in advance with barely adequate security, hence people crashing the gates. Soon, though, everybody wanted to have their version of Woodstock. Entered the Rolling Stones, who wanted to put on a free concert of their own, with Santana, Jefferson Airplane, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, or CSNY for the kids, the Grateful Dead, with the Stones being the headlining act. Unlike Woodstock, this event was spur of the moment with very bad organization. In fact, they didn't even have a venue until 2 days before the concert, and that venue was Altamont Speedway near San Francisco, California. They also didn't have enough security, so they got about 100 members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang to help out with security. This was kinda like getting those white nationalists with the tiki torches in Charlottesville to do security for the BET Hip Hop Awards. It's just not a good idea. The payment to the gang, by the way, was $500 of beer. Yep, that was it. So, you got alcohol plus an infamously violent biker gang. What could possibly go wrong there? The concert actually started off violently. During Jefferson Airplane's set, singer Marty Bolan was knocked out by a gang member during a fight. The Grateful Dead, once they heard about what happened to Marty, left Altamont and didn't even play. Then things went from bad to tragic. During the Stones' set, a fight broke out between the Hells Angels and concertgoers. During the fight, gang member Alan Passaro stabbed and killed a concertgoer named Meredith Hunter. Hunter had a gun at the concert. Why? Who knows? What was known was that it happened right in front of the stage, but the Stones were unaware of what was going on and kept playing until the end of the concert. It wasn't until afterwards that they found out what actually happened. Hunter's death marked one of 3 that day during the concert. As luck would have it, the stabbing was captured on film. The Stones had a documentary crew filming them during that year's tour. The event was part of the movie Gimme Shelter. You can watch the entire day, including the stabbing, unfold on DVD or streaming services if you so choose. Good movie regardless of that event, though. For the record, the jury in the case of Alan Passaro found that he acted in self-defense, mainly because Hunter brought a gun. And so, Passaro was acquitted of murder. The disastrous Altamont Music Festival, which, according to VH1's 100 Most Shocking Events in Music History, ranks as number 3, was held on December 6th, 1969. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you about our other podcasts. The Music History Today podcast goes over the daily events in music history and drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. There's also the Music Halls of Fame podcast, which talks about a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with other Music Halls of Fame's museums and walks of fame. The Music Halls of Fame podcast drops every Thursday and can also be found on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. On December 8, 1980, an event shook the entire world, bringing to light the dangers of celebrity, and most people found out about it from watching television, specifically football. In 1980, John Lennon had come out of a self-imposed exile after taking a few years off to help raise his new son, Sean Lennon. He was partially inspired to write new music from a couple of things. The first was from a trip on a yacht that he took from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda, where the yacht got into a major storm, which sickened everybody except for him. And as the crew was incapacitated, John had to steer the boat for a few hours. As he steered, he thought about life and how fragile it was. He'd find out the hard way about that later in the year. Suddenly, he had clarity about his music and he wanted to get back to songwriting, which he did once the yacht pulled into port in Bermuda. The second thing that inspired him was hearing the B-52's debut single, Rock Lobster. He thought it reminded him of the music that his wife Yoko Ono used to do on one of her albums. Perhaps the world was ready for the music like that to come out again. John and Yoko decided to both contribute music to his new album, which was supposed to be at least a 2-album project. The first album was called Double Fantasy, and the second one was going to be called Milk and Honey. Lots of demo songs were recorded, and then John gave the demos to his producer, Jack Douglas, with one catch. Jack had to get musicians who John had never worked with before. Jack was told to not tell the studio musicians who they were recording for at all. Jack even got a couple of the guys from Cheap Trick to help do some of the recording, since Jack was producing the new Cheap Trick album at the same time. John at the time didn't have a record deal, and no one knew that he was actually recording new music. John paid for the recording sessions himself, but then his manager shrewdly leaked the story to the media that John was back in the recording studio, even though the album was pretty much finished at that point. All of the record companies, of course, came running. On September 20th, 1980, John inked a new record label deal with a new record label called Geffen Records, beating out a lot more experienced and better financed record labels. Label head David Geffen's trick to getting John to sign on the dotted line was one of the oldest rules in selling. Always talk to the wife first. David knew that Yoko's music was a part of this new album, even though he never listened to the demo tapes. And by talking to Yoko first, he showed respect to her and her music and saw her as an equal on this album, rather than everyone else who saw John as the driving force. Just a little lesson for you kids out there. Always take the woman seriously. The album Double Fantasy came out on November 17, 1980. The first single from the album was the song Just Like Starting Over, which some people thought was John talking about being back recording or about being with a new record label. It was neither of those things. It was just a general feeling that he had, since he wrote the song in Bermuda once he got on land after that harrowing trip on the yacht. He added the words "just like" to the title because Dolly Parton had a song called Starting Over at that point in time. So, Just Like Starting Over was one of the last songs that John finished in the studio and was supposed to be sung in the style of Roy Orbison and Elvis Presley, although John backed off of that part of the idea when recording the song. The song was recorded at the Hit Factory in New York City on August 8th and released in America on October 27, 1980. At first, both the album Double Fantasy and the single did so-so. It wasn't the critics' favorite album when it came out. The album debuted high, though, but then it dropped. In England, the single hit the top 10 pretty quickly in England, and then it dropped as well. In America, on December 8th, the single was at number 6, but it was still climbing at that point. And then fate, or rather the ugly side of man, intervened. December 8th, 1980 started out like a normal day for John and Yoko. They had a photo shoot with famed photographer Annie Leibovitz. Then they went to the Record Plant recording studio in New York City to work on songs for Milk and Honey. And as they were getting into their limo, John signed autographs for some fans waiting outside his apartment at the Dakota Building on Central Park West in New York. For one of those fans, he signed a copy of the Double Fantasy vinyl. At 10:50 p.m., he and Yoko came back to the apartment from the recording session. Outside the Dakota waited the fan who John had hours earlier signed a copy of his album for. As John walked up to the Dakota, the man, Mark David Chapman, pulled out a gun and shot John Lennon. Then Mark sat down and started reading a copy of the book The Catcher in the Rye while he waited for the police to show up. John passed away a short time later. The case was a huge reminder of the dangers of celebrity, a case that would be replayed on numerous occasions since. More on that in a couple of minutes because December 8th comes up again with somebody else. Because of the late hour that it happened, some people, like myself as a kid, didn't find out about it until the next morning while watching the morning news or reading the newspaper. However, if you were up late that night, then you found out about it two different ways. The first was if you were listening to your local radio station and the DJ announced it. The second was if you were watching football. Back in 1980, Monday Night Football on ABC television was a cultural phenomenon. It was one of the most popular TV shows of the weeks. In fact, it usually ranked in at number 1 or 2 for the week. That particular night, the Miami Dolphins were playing the then annual doormat of their division, the New England Patriots, who are now back to being the doormats of their division. Thanks, Tom Brady. Anywho, it was broadcaster Howard Cosell who interrupted the game to make the announcement that John had been shot and then killed. Remember, there was no nationwide cable, no CNN really at that point, no notifications popping up on your smartphone, hell, no smartphones or cell phones of any sort, no internet, no personal computers. TV, newspaper, and radio were the ways you got your information, and they were kings back in those days. Worldwide shock was immediate. On VH1's list of most shocking events in music history, John Lennon's death ranks as the most shocking. Many tributes were made to John, including near where he was shot. In fact, a small part of Central Park across the street from the Dakota was later renamed Strawberry Fields in honor of Lennon, who used to love going over there to take walks. Ironically, 24 years to the day later, on December 8, 2004, another tragic death of a musician occurred. Guitarist Dimebag Darrell Abbott, who became famous in the band Pantera but was in his own band called Damage Plan on that date, was playing a Damage Plan gig at the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio. During the band's first song, a deranged fan, Nathan Gale, rushed the stage and shot and killed Dimebag Darrell on stage during the actual performance. Then took out the band's head of security, Jeffrey Mayhem Thompson, a club employee, Aaron Hulk, and a fan of the band called Nathan Bray. And he also wounded 3 other people before finally being killed by a Columbus, Ohio police officer. Dimebag Darrell Abbott was 38 years old at the time. The death of John Lennon on December 8th, 1980. The death of Dimebag Darrell Abbott on December 8th, 2004. This next story is about a man who also passed away far too soon, who was starting to achieve crossover stardom until an accident ended up taking his life. Otis Redding was born on September 9, 1941. He has been called one of the greatest singers of popular music ever. He was a member of Little Richard's backup band, The Upsetters, for a time, and also Johnny Jenkins's band, The Pine Toppers. He started recording as a solo artist in 1962 with Stax Records. His first single was the classic These Arms of Mine back in 1962. In 1964, he put out his debut album, Pain in My Heart, and what followed was an incredible amount of album and touring production. In fact, as far as touring went, he toured the South and Europe continuously for the better part of the decade, all the while recording song after song. In 1964 and 1965, Otis Redding put out 3 albums. The aforementioned These Arms of Mine was in 1964. In March of 1965, he put out his second album, The Great Otis Redding Sings Soul Ballads. That album had Otis's first big hit, Mr. Pitiful. While on tour to support this particular album, Otis started working on songs that would become part of his next album. He decided that most of those songs would be cover versions of soul songs. 3 of the original songs were co-written by him: I've Been Loving You Too Long, Respect, and Old Man Trouble. Respect would be slowed down and covered by Aretha Franklin's classic version. The entire album was recorded in 3 days. The recording started on April 19th and ended up finishing on July 9th and 10th. He was backed up by the members of the Memphis Horns, the Bar Keys, and Booker T and the MGs. The album was released on September 15, 1965, and although the album only made it to number 75 on Billboard's album charts, 3 of the singles would become top 40 hits: I've Been Loving You Too Long, Respect, and Shake. The album is considered one of the greatest albums of all time, even though most of it is cover songs. That album, by the way, was called Otis Blue. And after Otis Blue, Otis's career started going better and better. By 1967, Otis was actually hitting his stride, and after years of being the workhorse for Stax Records, he was finally getting his due. His gravelly vocals, plus his sex appeal and energetic performances, were winning over audiences worldwide. He started off by breaking through at the Monterey Rock Festival only 6 months earlier, the same festival that saw The Who and Jimi Hendrix rise to prominence in America. Aretha Franklin made a hit out of his song Respect at that point, and Redding was getting some respect of his own with songs like I've Been Loving You Too Long and Try a Little Tenderness. On December 7th, 1967, Otis Redding left a Memphis recording studio having worked on what would end up being his biggest hit. He needed to get to Cleveland, Ohio for a TV performance on a show called Upbeat, and also to do 3 concerts in 2 nights at Leo's Casino, and then fly over and do a concert in Madison, Wisconsin. Redding took a private plane, a Beechcraft H-18 that Redding had bought. On the plane were members of the group the Bar Keys, guitarist Jimmy King, saxophonist Phelan Jones, organist Ronnie Caldwell, and drummer Carl Cunningham, along with trumpet player Ben S. Cawley Jr. and the group's valet Matthew Kelly, and the pilot, who was Richard Frazier. One other member of the Bar Keys, James Alexander, was not on the plane for these trips. Because there wasn't any room for him on the plane, Alexander had been taking commercial flights and took one from Cleveland to Wisconsin. That decision ended up saving his life that day. The group did their television performance in Cleveland and also their 3 concerts at Leo's Casino in Cleveland. Otis called his wife and kids on December 9th. It was the last time that his family would hear Otis's voice while he was alive. The weather itself on December 10th was pretty bad. There was heavy rain along with fog, and they were warned not to fly. According to an interview, James Brown had a conversation with Redding before he left to go to Cleveland to warn him that the plane was way too small to have that many people and that much band equipment on it. Shades of Ilea? Yes, absolutely. Brown also said that the plane had a lot of service issues and was an old plane with an old battery. However, concert performances are important, and since the one at the Factory nightclub near the University of Wisconsin wasn't too far as the crow flies, Frazier felt that he could make the flight, so the decision to fly was made. A little after 3 p.m., about 4 miles out from the runway at Truex Field Airport in Madison, pilot Richard Frazier radioed in that he wanted permission to land the plane. As the plane approached the runway in Madison, something happened, and the plane crashed into a small lake, killing Otis and all but one person on the plane. That one person, Ben S. Cawley Jr., remembered being asleep and then waking up just before the plane crashed, feeling that the plane was spinning. He remembered Phelan Jones saying, "Oh no," while looking out the window. He remembered undoing his seatbelt for some reason or other, which may have actually saved his life. And the next thing he knew, he was in the waters of Lake Monona, grasping onto a seat cushion to stay alive. Since Cawley wasn't a great swimmer, he really couldn't save anyone else. He heard someone screaming for help, but by the time he got to where that screaming was in the lake, that person had gone under and drowned. Otis's body was found the next day on December 11th. James Alexander, who by then was already in Wisconsin from that commercial flight, identified the body on December 12th. According to Alexander, Redding was still strapped to his seat when divers found his body. Otis Redding was 26 years old. The cause of the plane crash has not been determined as far as anybody knows. However, a biography that was published about Otis in 2001 has claimed many things, really bad ones, including drug use and affairs. Otis's widow filed a lawsuit against the author, accusing the author of lying. Not quite sure what happened to that lawsuit, but hopefully the widow won it. In this biography, the author also claimed that Otis's manager conspired with the mafia to cause the plane crash in order to collect on a $1 million life insurance policy. To date, absolutely none of the author's claims, best of my knowledge at least, has ever been proven. Back to Redding's final song, though. As it turns out, the song that Redding was working on at the time of his death was Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. At the end of the song, Redding couldn't complete the lyrics to the end of the song, so he whistled them instead, always intending to get back to the song to put the final lyrics in. He never got the chance. The single, including its now famous whistling part, was released and not only became the biggest hit of Otis's career, but it was also the first posthumous single to hit #1 on the Billboard Singles Chart. Otis Redding was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989. The great, iconic soul singer Otis Redding passed away in a plane crash, along with most of the members of the band The Bar-Kays, at the age of 26 on December 10th, 1967. Finally, the Caruso of rock, the Big O, the man with the trademark sunglasses and all-black everything outfit. In an era where every rock and roll singer was trying to show how much of a man he was, Roy Orbison was not afraid to show his vulnerable side with his silky smooth voice doing ballads. In short, he was the Drake of the early rock and roll era. Okay, without the really whiny side. I mean, seriously, Drake, would it kill you to man up a little and stop whining in your songs? And whatever happened to honor and battle rapping? What, you got your feelings hurt because you got crushed by Kendrick Lamar, and now you have to sue Kendrick's record label? What a... Anyway, I digress. It's not about Drake. Let's continue. Roy Orbison was born in Texas in 1936. When he was 6 years old, he was given a guitar. Roy started playing in a band called the Wink Westerners, who played country music and also had their own radio show, which was a local one. When he finished high school, Roy went to North Texas State College. His idea was to study geology so that he could work in the oil fields if the music ended up not working out. Sort of his plan B, you might say. Once he heard that fellow North Texas State College student Pat Boone had gotten a record contract, that was it. Roy decided, screw plan B, we're going to do the exact same thing. Roy ended up transferring to Odessa Junior College. While there, he and what remained of the Wink Westerners played dances on the weekends and had a local TV show. One day, Johnny Cash stopped by to perform on that TV show. He suggested that the group audition for Sam Phillips at Sun Records. They auditioned, but Sam turned them down flat. Around this time, Roy and his band got a better TV gig with a much bigger TV station. They changed the name of the band to the Teen Kings. Since Sun Records didn't take them, the group decided to record a song that Roy had written a few years earlier while at North Texas State College called Ooby Dooby. Once they released it on J-Well Records, the song actually did pretty well. It also got noticed by Sam Phillips, who only months earlier had turned the group down for a recording contract. This time, Sam said yes. The Teen Kings re-recorded Ooby Dooby for Sun Records, and the song went to number 59 on the Billboard Singles Chart. The group ended up splitting up, but Roy decided to stay at Sun Records. After becoming angry with the way his career was going at Sun, though, he went on tour with Patsy Cline, then quit performing to concentrate on songwriting at songwriting firm Acuff Rose. Rose eventually brought him to the attention of Monument Records after he had written and recorded a couple of songs with his writing partner Joe Melson. Monument Records was where Roy would become a huge star. Between 1960 to 1964, Roy put out song classics like Only the Lonely, Crying, Dream Baby, Blue Bayou, Pretty Woman, In Dreams, and a whole lot more. The song Crying, for instance, was written by Roy and Joe Melson in 1961. The song is one of Roy's signature operatic ballads. It was released in July 1961 and went to number 2 3 months later. Don McLean did a cover version in 1980 that went to number 6 on the country music charts and ended up being his second biggest hit of his career, right behind American Pie. As for Roy, he did a duet version of the song with Katie Lang, which did very well on the charts and also won them a Grammy Award. Roy seemed to disappear for a number of years, but then things changed. Roy was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. He did a very well-received all-star tribute for his music called A Black and White Night. In October of 1988, he became a member of the supergroup, the Traveling Wilburys, along with Tom Petty, George Harrison, Bob Dylan, and Jeff Lynne of the group ELO, or Electric Light Orchestra, if you will. And together, they put out an album. The world took an interest in Roy again. He put out a new album himself in November of 1988 called Mystery Girl with the hit song You Got It. Late in 1988, despite having chest pains, Roy started a hectic schedule with touring, enjoying his career resurgence. On December 4th, 1988, Roy played what turned out to be his final concert at Highland Heights, Ohio. 2 days later, on December 6th, Roy Orbison passed away from a heart attack. He was 52 years old. Roy Orbison's final concert on December 4th, 1988, and the death of Roy Orbison from a heart attack on December 6th, 1988. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for December 4th through the 10th. Thank you very much for listening or watching if you're watching this on Spotify or YouTube.